Hello. Hello, everyone. I don't know. I don't know who's here. Um, you all better be giving a big thanks to Estelle. Without Estelle, I couldn't stream. We couldn't be having this. Estelle's the one streaming this for me. Estelle's my little background hand, but she will not speak. I'm only watching this stream because I'm gonna get paid. What do you mean you're gonna get? Who's gonna pay you? I'm not. I don't have money. I'm broke. Okay. You should be paying me for the privilege of hearing what I'm about to tell you. But I don't want your money. Well, I do, but I don't. Yeah, I'll be Estelle in this shit. Yeah, that's Estelle. Estelle has access to my YouTube account. One of my YouTube accounts, because I have three. One's for my animal videos. One's for my YouTube stuff. The other one's for music. Um, uh, but yeah. So, where have I been? Well, that's a complicated. Well, that's an easy question. That's an easy question. I'm mentally ill. Um, I've been kind of in and out of psychiatric hospitals and stuff like that. And look, okay, guys, I'm really not doing too good, but hey, it's okay. I also, okay, Estelle, I need you to zoom in. I need you to enhance. To be super honest, can't have the text so far away. Enhance more. Enhance even more. Enhance again. There we go. That should be good. See, look, I don't even have to do anything. Um, but yeah, I've been in there, and because of this, I've been thinking about a lot. Because I've been thinking about a lot of things, and so I want to talk about this lovely little article and French drug substitution clinics. Sorry, and psychiatric clinics. So I'm gonna do so. Scroll down. The etymology of the term addiction is the state of slavery which befalls the one who does not pay his debts. In the Roman Empire, the debtor became the slave of his creditor. The addict becomes the slave of the addictive drug. In this article, I want to argue that this definition of addiction structures French addiction treatments, infuses them with a classic theory of action of the object and of the subject. The etymological definition of addiction, the subject is the toy of the drug, describes an extreme situation where the substance acts deterministically and the subject passively submits. My aim is to sketch out these debates while focusing on one practice of substitution at the Blue Clinic, in the hope of finding something other than these well rehearsed theories of action. I want to highlight a situation in which the user would not be the toy of the drug. I began this study with a vow of abstinence. I wanted to learn about the drug without entering into perfusion with it. I did not I did not do participant observation of drug use in Paris. following the users around place Stalingrad to be as close as possible to their lives. They did not learn to shoot up heroin or other illegal drugs. The immersion of the ethnographer of illegal drugs simply felt too risky. This essential idea of postmodern ethnography was abandoned from the outset. That I would emancipate those I was studying by getting close to them, identifying with them, eliminating difference or distance between me and them. I would not even assume we were all subjects. This would not be a symmetrical ethnography. This vow of abstinence took me to other sites where care professionals and drug users were explicitly asking the questions of the relation between subject and object, just as I was, and in particular whether this relation need be one of slavery. I began intensive observation at an experimental substitution clinic in the suburb of Paris in 1995, a period when, in France, the benefit or harm of a daily dose of methadone for the treatment of opiate addiction was violently debated. Rather than starting from an identification with drug users, I searched for colleagues among care professionals and drug users who asked the same questions as myself. I would not assume they were like me, but allow the others that others post questions with me. My aim became to describe the settings in which they asked these questions, experimentations they were able to deploy in such settings. The sociology of technology, inspired by phenomenology, has taught us that capacities are not inherent, but acquired as one moves through a dispositive. Here, I attempted to learn from these actors what setting I needed in order to become capable of asking the question of the relation between drug and use subject. I followed the actors, to use an often quoted phrase of Latour's, since that I sought to learn from them, staff and users at the Blue Clinic, how to set up the conditions of my confidence. Um, I'm really mentally ill. This is a fact that if you get any closeness to me, you will not be surprised with. Uh, I'm very open about being mentally ill. Uh, very open about the ways I'm mentally ill, and sometimes the specifics of things of my conditions, of my you know past issues and stuff like that. Um, and as a result of them, uh, and other things, I've actually spent time in psychiatric hospitals. I spent a large part of my teenage life in psychiatric hospitals. Um, and during that time, I I experienced what I consider extreme mistreatment. I'm not going to say abuse. Uh, I feel like that's a just word for some of the things that happened to me and that I saw happen to others. But I won't use that. Yeah, neglect. Neglect is a fine word. I suffered extreme neglect. I was given meds. Obviously, I was given meds. Um, but then I was when I would have side effects that were really extreme, that were severe, that were quite disabling to me. Like even worse than whatever issues I had. Um, Doctors would ignore me. Doctors wouldn't take my concerns seriously. Doctors would kind of just brush me off. Whenever I would say a medication wasn't working, um, trying to be helpful and cooperative, I would be not listened to. I was repeatedly called, said that I was faking, and that I was just making everything up and all blah blah blah. blah this and um you know I I had some abuse happen to me throughout my life, and I got flashbacks. And it wasn't like for a long time that I understood. I experienced flashbacks for what that actually meant. Um, because despite my therapists and doctors knowing that I was abused since I was like 13, um, despite that, they didn't think that it might be important to explain to a 13-year-old what PTSD might be like, what flashbacks might entail. Um, because as the name kind of implies, and could kind of mislead in a sense, it's a flashback, and the way this is often portrayed in media is as a visual phenomenon. When you have a flashback, it's visual. You see it happen to you again. You're in that situation. You're going through it again. But that's not what I experienced. What I experienced was I would feel like someone was touching. This is going to get a bit. Sorry, this is going to get a bit. But I need to explain this to you because it's kind of important. I I would feel how it feel uh, what the person did to me over again. And no one explained that to me, that was a flashback. I was experiencing a flashback. And it would cause me extreme terror and fright. I would hide because of how scared I was. I would go up in a fucking corner and I would curl up because I didn't know what the fuck else to do. And it was the only way I could help myself feel safe. Like as a little kid. Like as I was 13. I was a I was a I was a child. I was a child. Um, and I've had a lot of stuff like that. And it's kind of been my entire treatment with being mentally ill. Um, and I've recently been talking to some people, and they're big defenders of psychiatry and all that stuff, and that's great. I'm not saying psychiatry is bad or psychiatry. Okay, well, I am going to say the second thing. Actually, I'm going to say psychiatry is bad, but I'm not saying it's totally bad. I'm not throwing the psychiatry out with the bathwater. But what I'm saying is that there are ways psychiatric treatment has gone about. There are ways we talk about it that just aren't fucking helpful. Um, Whenever someone complains about mistreatment and the wanting for change in psychiatric settings, the first thing you often hear is from a person who says, "Well, I was helped. Well, I was helped." And as someone who has experienced stuff, and I totally understand. I understand this. Uh, I assume these people, they're kind of defensive because without this, they would be dead in a worse situation or whatever, and I understand that. Um, but there's really horrible conditions that are perpetuated, um, and not because of bad doctors. That's not how it is. It's not bad doctors that are the issue. It isn't people being malicious, being this, being that. It is things being put in place that don't allow positive developments to occur and stuff like that. And that is a really big issue. And psychiatry, I have to say, especially in America, um, um, I can only speak to my state. I've only been in psychiatric institutions in my own state, in Florida. But in Florida, it's really bad. Like, you don't know how bad it is. Unless you've like experienced that fucking shit, unless you've been through it. I knew kids who were just like me, like, like who were just like me, and who had similar stuff. And like people will be like, well, it takes a while to go to find the right psychiatrist, to find the right therapist. And it's like I went through multiple. I went through quite a few as a kid. Because whenever a psychiatrist would determine Florida is Baker Act when you're put under psychiatric hold, um, for I was usually put under psychiatric hold for like 2 weeks. So yeah, but when that happened, to me, I I didn't think I could trust my therapist anymore or my psychiatrist, whoever it was. I couldn't trust them. Um, and I had already had other bad experiences with therapists. Stuff like that. I don't want to get into it all because this is kind of leading away, but all this just to illustrate. Sorry, I didn't something. All this to say that, like, you know, there needs to be different ways of going about this. There needs to be different. Um, you can't just you you can't just say, "Hey, we have this good method." You have to figure out ways to enforce it. Enforce it. It's the wrong word. Integrate it. Integrate it's a better word. You have to find ways to integrate approaches, to integrate these things into the daily practices of this stuff, and find ways also to make them amenable to the specific local conditions of hospitals. This is also something that's important. The hospitals operate in their own specific ways. Like, they they might follow similar codes, but I was actually reading something um, uh, about this from Indifferences in Medicine, about how there's specific local conditions though that do go into hospitals that step away from the set practices, but are also instrumental in creating stability in the hospital itself. And um, yeah, um, but Estelle says structural issues a bit misleading because it implies fixed things, but it is in fact about how the milieu functions, how actors interact with it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's it's structural in the sense that certain things are built upon other things. Um, but these things can actually be reworked. They can be shifted sometimes. Um, but there is a sort of hierarchy that ends up going into these things that needs to be, I think, recognized in a certain sense. Um, that um, that is a hierarchy. By the way, uh, the hierarchy is enforced by by uh, like other things outside of it, because the thing other people don't understand or don't like to talk about is that psychiatry isn't just psychiatry. A mentally ill person who is homeless is going to continue to struggle with mental health issues if they stay homeless because of whatever. Like you could imagine a number of situations where like stuff like this is the case, where you can integrate other things. Like what about access to medication? What if they're not homeless? What if they actually just can't afford medication? What if they actually can't take the time out of their day to go to a pharmacy because the pharmacy is too far away? What if you can imagine a whole bunch of things that go into this, that go into creating these things? And so whenever people tell me, well, hey, I have something and it works, well, it actually doesn't work for some people. And the fact that it doesn't work for some people is to me of greater importance than it working for other people, even working for most people. Um, we can't just stop at well, it helps me. Well, it helps me. Well, this helps me. You have to listen to these people. Listen to these people who are struggling. There were people in there who were far worse off than I was, who I watched, and it was like a horrifying thing. And it's a terrifying thing in general. Um, but yeah, okay. Well, I'm going to continue. I'm probably going to talk about this more as we go on. Probably going to add more stuff. Um, but that's why the title is the name that it is, because this is what it's about. Drug clinics, psychiatric clinics. We're going to talk about this through Gomart. And I find her work lovely for this. I find her work perfect for everything that I am interested in, that I talk about, and that I love. Um, so yeah. The first condition I learned from them was enthusiasm. It was clear that a rapid and deadly critique of their practice was possible. The rhetoric of medical sociology could immediately be used to describe a conflict of interest between authoritative doctors and vulnerable individuals who seemed to have lost in advance. At the clinic, I was submerged in disgust, outrage, hope, horror, and thought. At first, that here too such a description would be appropriate. The medical sociological reflex, however, would have ignored the enthusiasm of the first methadone promoters, users, and professionals. This enthusiasm forced me away from a critical sociology of medicine, which had been so useful in the case of psychiatry, for example. In order to learn something from these actors, in order to be surprised by methadone and its relation with subject, I would have to discipline myself into writing a eulogy of the treatment experimented with at this clinic. Also, hello, VB. The article, then, is in praise of methadone, as it was delivered at the small pilot clinic in B, near Paris, between 1995 and 1996. This praise is not objective or fair to other actors. In the midst of this debate on methadone, where actors must take a position for or against each other, where funding can be won or lost because of a rumor or an academic article in a foreign language, I collude with the Blue Clinic team and clients. I begin with a theoretical overinterpretation of their hypotheses and techniques. This is not an empty gesture of loyalty. It turned out that when I took their biases to be my biases, like enthusiasm, it became possible to describe an alternative relation between drug and user, object and subject. It became possible to say that there were conditions under which the addictive drug user was not the slave of the drug. This is actually really important. And And I'm wondering if this is an ant approach generally. I haven't read many people besides Latour, but I've never heard Latour use this language. And I'm wondering where she's getting this from, to take the biases of them as their own. Because that sounds like it could be something Latour says, but that also sounds like it could be something that she's getting maybe from another ant scholar, another, you know, um, one of these people. I'm not exactly sure, but it's a very yeah. A curious symmetry did emerge then, after all, in this ethnography. I did not assume that there was from the start an already constituted subject, myself, symmetrical to other pre existing subjects, those I studied. Rather, I allowed that all there were passages through dispositives, through which subjects, the term might no longer be valid, emerged and emerged with new capacities. I followed the actors in their exploration of a treatment that would allow users to emerge as other than slaves, boys of drugs. They tentatively modified their dispositive in an effort to ensure that those who pass through it become capable of an alternative relation drug user, where the drug does not subjugate but allows its user to act in turn, to act with. The user acquired this capacity as she/he passed through the specific setting of the clinic. Simultaneously, I explored ways of describing events of the Blue Clinic, not simply as repeating the abuses of medicine and psychiatry, so well documented by medical sociology. To do so, I made the clinic pass through another dispositive, a conceptual setup made up of theoretical perspectives, mainly drawn from the sociology of technology and science. This setup was very simple, insisting only that users, drugs, care professionals, myself, or any other entity possess no property before they pass through a dispositive. This setup then allowed me to be attentive to the constraints that might allow for properties, interesting properties, that the capacity to act differently to emerge in passing creatures. It became possible to describe the Blue Clinic as an experiment with the conditions under which certain drugs do not subjugate their users, but allow their users to act in turn. Um, Here, I first sketch my theoretical appreciation of their critique of traditional treatment. Then I follow the actors in their practice and attempt to detail further their experiment on the possible and unexpected relations of object and subject, drug and user. Um, this is really this is really important to me as a thing. I was gonna say I was gonna say it. Um, so she's gonna get to it. In France, what was there before substitution treatment? Well, there was a treatment that largely consisted of abstinence treatment. Um, the doctors told you the person addicted to drugs. Well, we have these programs, and to get into them, basically, you had to already be off of drugs. You had to have stopped using. And I think there was actually, I think she gets into it. I think there was set periods of time where sometimes these treatments were available. It wasn't just you had to say you wanted to quit or whatever it is, and you had to show that you were willing to engage with this. Um, which would, by the way, I think already be problematic in itself. Um, but there was something more fundamental at issue in that they expected the user to basically already be off the drugs. Um, which this is specifically going to be a methadone, surprise by methadone. It's going to be about mostly it's going to be about opiates, and the effects of opiate withdrawal can be really severe. Um, I I had I know people who you know who possibly are. I haven't talked to him in a long time. He was like one of like a family friend basically. and he was addicted to heroin and stuff like that, and it was like a thing. It was um like I it was the thing. But yeah. Sorry, give me a moment. We're talking about all this emotional shit, and I'm like about to cry. And because we're getting into like really personal things to me, really very personal things that like I've like I thought about a really long time. Experimenters with with substance, a generous overinterpretation of the French debate. The Blue Clinic was founded and supported by actors, in particular AC and DT, who had formulated a severe critique of the existing French specialized system of care for addiction. These actors had all previously been employed in the specialized establishment of care, but had marginalized themselves in the mainstream by criticizing their own profession for having refused to provide systematically and on a large scale substitution, i.e., methadone and opiates, or psychiatric medication, such as antidepressants, to drug users into the mid 1990s, despite growing international concerns about drug-related HIV infections. Oh, yeah, that's another really thing. A lot of these people also didn't want to give these drug users psychiatric medication. They didn't want to do like, uh, it was really bad. Like this shit was like really bad. Like, really fucking bad. And like I said, like it says here, this was like until the 1990s in France that that like substitution started becoming a thing. And in America, it kind of is a thing, but I don't think it's really a thing still. It might be more in some places than others. It might be more in specific settings than others. I'm really not sure, but I don't think it's really a thing in America. I'm pretty sure it's not. Um, Rather than present a fair, panoramic vision of the debate between these two sets of actors, the promoters of substitution and the specialists, I propose to interpret just one side of the debate, lending it theoretical weight. In this enthusiastic reinterpretation, I suggest that not I, but they came up with the hypothesis that subjects do not have qualities before they enter a setup. Indeed, subjects are not even subjects before that. It is not I, but they who show that this hypothesis has clear consequences for the treatment of a drug user. The point here, however, is not to pinpoint the source of the argument. Neither is the point to worry about whether this argument was actually a fair criticism of existing treatments. Instead, what matters here is that in the midst of this imbroglio, new ways of posing the problem of the relation of drug and user became possible. For the sake of these possibilities and for theoretical reasons which become clear in this section, I allow that my own action, ethnographic analysis, began under the influence of their no doubt biased critique. Until the beginning of the 1990s, in France, psychological treatments of drug addiction began with the injunction of abstinence. Before entering treatment, the addict went through a cure of withdrawal from the drug. Only when he/she was clean did treatment begin. When the users relapsed into drugs, treatment was interrupted because one should not speak with one's mouth full. One specialist in the psychological treatment of addiction wrote that the capacity of a user to maintain his subjectivity was in direct relation to the distance he maintained from the drug. The confirmed addict was not a person, but an empty carcass. The drug reduced the person to nothingness because it had an immediate action which produced pleasure without requiring effort or mentalization from the user. A specific theory of substance was at the basis of these psychological definitions of addiction. A substance was a cause with immediate, fixed, predictable, and detrimental effects. These descriptions also implied a theory of human agency. Either the subject was abstinent, an autonomous, liberal agent, maintaining a safe distance from drugs, or he/she was addicted, the toy of the terminations. The specialists set up a dualism between subject and drug, which the action of one term detracted from that of the other. The gap between the two poles dramatized the irreconcilability between human and drug action. Once a person entered into commerce with such a powerful object, he/she surrendered his/her capacity to act. He/she could not act when the drug acted. To the specialist, it was unthinkable that subjects might ever benefit from the actions of drugs. It's like, I really love this. I really love the way Gomart is setting it up. And despite, I'm gonna be super honest, from like the quotes she has of specialists during this time, she says like, "Oh, this is an over interpretation um, of this one side." I kind of don't feel like that. I really don't feel like that because this is what they believe. This is what they thought. Um, um, Something really important is that the people who later become substitution people, the main advocates for it, were people who were previously specialists or who were actively specialists. And the reason why they wanted to do substitution treatment is because they wanted to help their patients. Their methods weren't helping. Their methods weren't helping, and they saw that and they were horrified by it. Um, and and it's like a thing. It's like a thing. At the source of these definitions of addiction was the specialist supposition the subject was pre-given. The subject founds and constitutes the world. Substitution of one drug for another. So these people right now, what she's talking about is going to be largely people dealing with opiate addiction. And so instead of giving them, you might potentially give them, you would give them opiates that were clean. Specific, she's going to get into something interesting, which is actually uh, that for different kinds of users, you actually use different kinds of opiates, which seems silly. I mean, which seems silly, which seems obvious, which seems like really obvious. Um, uh, but it's also really interesting. You give methadone because the different opiates actually have different effects. Um, um, there's differences in how it did, and substitution also, by the way, isn't something given to people who necessarily want to quit. It's also given to people so that they don't get HIV, so they don't get so that they have a safe place to inject. This is a thing in America that was talked about uh, uh, in leftist spaces, sometimes safe injecting sites. This would definitely, I think, constitute potentially a form of substitution treatment. Maybe it'd be more specific. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yes. Especially in America, especially in America. Um, and so yeah, and so you have the specialists and the substitution people, and Gomar's on the side of the substitution people, which I think she's rightly so in. Uh, at the source of these definitions of addiction was the specialist supposition that the subject was pre-given. The subject founds and constitutes the world. An addiction clinic cannot but start from reality, that is, from the addicts. The approach that we propose is transdisciplinary, dynamic, and humanist, but does not claim any total or definitive truth. It is founded on an encounter in practice and space, which is at the very least that of an encounter between person and person, an intersubjective relation, an interactive relation. The subject is primary and individual. Drugs could never be building blocks in the construction of the subject. The subject is precisely that which is not constructed or achieved. Um, Partially, she's not explaining it scientifically. Um, she is going to explain why she thinks it's effective, but this isn't going to be through some doctoral description. This is going to be through through, like Estelle just said, an ethnology of this of a specific substitution clinic in France, in talking about how they actually deal with patients, what happens, and all of that. Um, but substitution treatment, she does link to articles talking about its efficacy. Its efficacy has been known for a really long time. It just hasn't been adopted. Um, Apparently, its efficacy goes back to like the 60s. I'm pretty sure it goes back really far. Apparently, uh, uh, it's just not done. Um, in like especially like America. Uh, it might be done more in France. I don't know. I think based on this, it is probably more done in France, but I'm not sure. I didn't look into that. I probably should have just before since I had some time before I was going to start. But I'm in America. I know I don't think that that's really the case. I don't think we really have that here. I might be wrong, but I don't think we really have that here. I don't know of anything. Maybe in some states, but definitely not as a rule. Construction of the subject for these specialists limits itself to maturation. In normal conditions, the human infant begins his life in a state of organic dependence. The march of the individual, as well as that of our species, seems to be nothing other than the struggle to untangle oneself than those dependencies which are alienating, to enlarge one's spatiality and temporality, to loosen the constraints imposed by natural elements, and especially to establish autonomy. This autonomy is both a limit and a link with others. In this sense, it is a quest for something that we call freedom or happiness that passes through pleasure and requires sharing. The task of the individual is to reduce the number of dependencies, or rather, tautologically, those dependencies which are alienating, natural, external. The mature psychological subject strives towards the ideal of the free subject. This is an ideal shared with political philosophers such as Hobbes and Rousseau. The entire philosophy of enlightenment and beyond the whole conception of the individual citizen rests upon the duality of man who belongs to nature and submits to its laws, but who also has a talent for freedom and is therefore responsible for his acts, a dialectic constitutive of his existence. There are no intermediaries between autonomy and independence, between losing subjectivity and being a full subject. For the specialist, the subject is restricted to these two configurations. It is either already there, forgiven, or already lost. Maturation, therefore, is not a literal genesis of the subject. If construction there is, the word is symbolic. Maturation is possible because the infant possesses from the start the seed of subjectivity. He matures, develops. Maturation is the extension of the space of freedom. Subjectivity is not gained, achieved. It is slowly and gradually manifests itself as the expression of inherent properties of an essence, the subject. The only mix or intermediary that the specialist conceive of is that of a dialectical dynamic, the crucial struggle between dependency and freedom, as in the quote above. However, the dialectical theory does not solve the dualism, but rather topicalizes its contradiction. No intermediate, no mixture is possible, only repetitive alternations. And I think this is at the heart of it, as she said. One of the key things about French addiction treatment is, well, what happens when the clean drug user starts using drugs again? Well, the treatment stops. It actually stops them. You don't get treatment anymore. Because, as it says, one should not speak with their mouth full, and this is that's kind of what she's talking about. She's going to explain it, but like this way of talking about things, this way of dealing with the drug user, with the user of these substances, literally alienates them from the treatment you're trying to give. When you treat it as as a way of just going about, you need abstinence, you need this. You exclude who you're trying to do because they're a drug user. They are most certainly they are probably chemically addicted to the drug at this point. It's opiates. I don't know how quickly opiates take effect. I think they take. I think they are. Sorry, I don't think opiates are very addictive. I don't know how quickly very addictive is. But I assume most of the patients that these people will be dealing with already have some. I don't know how physical addiction works, but they probably have some physical dependency. Where if they stop the drug, there's going to be the person might die, like and stuff like that, because that's another thing. And so yeah. Um, Addiction is the antithesis of maturation, a pathology of freedom. Drugs grant extraordinarily easy pleasure to the drug user and thereby allow him/her to avoid conflict with other people, which are necessary for his/her maturation. The building blocks of maturation are not concrete and determined, but unpredictable, intersubjective relations. Drugs lure the user away from the symbolic construction, maturation. The drug user excels at avoiding the human other. not to go through the other. Such is indeed the problem of dependence on drugs. The one who marries the drug wants to jump from the dependence to independence without passing through the conflicts, the loss, and the uncertain encounter with the other human. Dope is a straitjacket, isolating by force. To enable the person to mature, the psychologist's task is to replace the user's relation to the drug with human relations. Estelle says it is very moralizing. Yeah, yes, it is. It's um and, and by the way, this way of doing things is different from in America. Uh, uh, I don't know how drug treatment works, but there has to be some interesting case studies like this. I would really hope that there are ethnographies of American drug treatment practices, because something would be very interesting, I think, for me to read, potentially find and like see and like compare this to the French ways, because in America, uh, unlike with uh, I guess with French scientific life, um, we kind of ignore philosophy in our science. But I guess the French kind of don't. They are they are a bit more attentive to it. Um, I think there's a very true part of what she is saying, but I also think the point should be less they ought to socialize, and more they ought to develop healthy relations in healthy outlets. Because a healthy relationship can simply exist between oneself and their goals. That this actually isn't what she's saying. This is she's characterizing the specialist position. This is kind of what this is what uh, 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 she's arguing. She's saying they're saying, and I think she's characterizing it. And there's kind of a problem with it. Um, um, I think I understand what you mean, but they're kind of meaning it. They don't just mean it in. Um, there's a very specific. I think. Sorry, I'm losing my words. You'll have to forgive me. There's a very specific. There's a very specific thing. I think the drug, the abstinence drug treatments were relying on, the specialist drug treatments were relying on, that the substitution treatments wanted to get rid of, because the substitution treatments, by the way, actually do kind of adopt what you're saying. They want to have a uh, 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 they don't just want to get the addict. Sorry, not the addict. They don't want to just want to get the drug user off of their drugs. Part of the substitution treatment is to make sure that the drug user is engaged in a hobby, is engaged with a potentially a job if they're able to hold down a job. But it's to make sure that they're engaged in something. They're doing something while they're going about this treatment. Um, that they are remaining active in some way. And it requires actually a lot of changes on the part of the drug user. Like it's not just the drug user takes the substitution treatment and goes home and goes about their life like basically the same way. You know, they have to stop hanging around people that they used to hang around. If this puts them at risk of uh, using again, um, and stuff like that. And there's like a whole thing, and she'll get into this too. But yeah, I'm just basically just saying what she's gonna say. According to the Blue Clinic founders, AC and DT, this proposition of care persistently failed. They refer to the low rates of success measured since the 1980s. AC argued that the inordinately high French rates of HIV infection and marginalization among drug users were signs that a large proportion of drug users had little or no contact with a specialized system of care for addiction. Shared that the requirement for abstinence had excluded these users from treatment, had pushed them back on the streets, and had thus contributed to their social and medical deterioration. She's formed political alliances with drug users self-help groups. Together, she and the users worked to convince key administrators, the Ministry of Health, that these specialists had failed in their mission to treat drug users because they were at least partially responsible for the alarming state of the population of drug users. Psychological treatment worsened the health and conditions of life of users instead of improving them. Stell says it's very hard to do so when you're homeless, and oftentimes the people who get you into drugs are also at shelters. Yeah, there's like a whole thing to this. Also, by the way, something I want to talk about related to psychiatric clinics as well. The other part of my title. Um, um, the last sentence. Together, she and the users worked to convince key administrators at the Ministry of Health these specialists had failed in their mission to treat drug users because they're at least partially responsible for the alarming state of the population of drug users. Psychological treatment worsened the health and conditions of life of users instead of improving them. Um, I had someone recently tell me something, talking about psychiatry. Um, I kind of said, um, I was, I kind of said, they were talking about Foucault and how Foucault wanted to empty the asylums, and I was like, if if I lived like 70 years ago, um, I probably would want to empty the asylums too. Um, and the person brought up this idea called contrastivism, where it's like, okay, well, the options of the time sucked, but they were the only options in town. Um, but it's like that's not an argument. It doesn't matter if it's the only option in town because the treatment might actually worsen the life of the users. Just because it's called a treatment, um, um, uh, this is actually the example where the use of the word pharmacon is like perfect because pharmacon at once and the same time means medicine, but it also means poison if I remember correctly. It doesn't just mean medicine. Um, and so what uh, you have to be careful that what you're doing isn't a pharmacon. Um, if I'm using that right, I don't know if I'm actually using it. But pharmacon's a lovely word for it because it illustrates the dual nature of this. Um, uh, 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 the thing that might be considered a treatment might actually be poisoning the person you're trying to help. You need to make sure it doesn't do that. That's obviously bad. You don't want to do that. You want to help them. You want to make sure they're okay. But yeah. And then it still also says, I was talking to this person who was on drugs, and he was telling me that he was able to get drugs in the backyard of the shelter. Okay, yeah. That's a little bit of an oversight. Yeah. Yeah. Um, that's the thing about this. These things develop, and these things need to be allowed to develop. Something very interesting about this, I think specifically, is that the thing that had helped push substitution treatment was not just doctors changing their practices, but it was doctors and their patients, the people that they're supposed to be treating, working together instead of being treated as these separate things, which I think should largely be the case. I think doctors should very much be working um, when there's radical issues like this. When there's not even radical issues, when there's issues like this, doctors and not users, doctors and patients should be like fucking in lockstep as much as they can. Um, because these things aren't just at these things aren't just uh, about having the best treatment created. You also need to make sure that that treatment is being integrated. I talked about this earlier, being integrated into current practices. Um, let the patients run the asylum. Um, yeah. Um, Hold on. Speaking of which, I actually found something. Okay, I don't know how this actually worked out. Sorry, I'm gonna take a little tangent. In California, they apparently left the they apparently left the hospital unlocked, and nothing happened, and nothing happened. Sorry, I'll have to. Sorry, that might be wrong, but apparently there were pretty good outcomes from that, and I forget the specifics of it. There's something interesting about that. Now that you speak of that, I was thinking of another thing that people would think of preposterous. Um, but yeah, um, there's something to that. You kind of should allow patients to be able to. There's a bit of a problem. Okay, there's a bit of a problem with psychiatric hospitals. In that you just feel like you're in a holding cell. And okay, I need to say something. Hold on, wait. I need another detour. So I've been to psychiatric hospitals my entire fucking life. There has only been a few occasions where I actually ever received therapy while in a psychiatric hospital. The only other time that I received therapy, uh, like any kind of therapy, um, in a hospital for because of like something that happened, um, was when I had tried to end myself, um, this most recent time, and a therapist came by every day and would talk to me for like 30 minutes about stuff that was going on. Like 30 minutes. And I'm just like, I'm gonna be so fucking honest with you. Okay. This was in the hospital side, by the way. I was in the hospital side. I wasn't on the psychiatric side. I was on the hospital side because I was receiving treatment uh for some stuff. I'm not gonna say specifically, but for some stuff related to what I did to try to, you know. But and I'm like so fucking honest. I don't know why. Like that just isn't done. Okay, I do know why. I'm sorry, I don't know why. I have an idea of why that isn't, but like it totally should be. It just totally should be. Um, and it was really nice, and I really enjoyed it, and it was like the best time I like ever had. Like in one of these facilities, like not the best time as in like, oh, I enjoyed it, I want to stay longer. The best time in that I didn't feel 24/7 miserable. I did actually enjoy. Um, I felt like despite not receiving any psychiatric treatment because I was able to talk my way out of going to the psychiatric side, despite not receiving any psychiatric treatment, um, I it was good. And by the way, I was only able to talk my way out of the psychiatric side because I knew the lady who was my psychiatrist um, since I was like 16, since I was like a kid. So only reason why after that. But yeah, the answer is yes, Estelle. You should listen to patients. I'm tired of this like fucking. I'm tired of this mentally ill propaganda where mentally ill people are just totally irrational and can never make decisions uh, for themselves. They can. You can. I'm sorry. You you can and you need to and you should and I think it's good for you. Because otherwise it creates a very alienated feeling when you're in these places and you feel like you're just a prisoner. You develop a lot of things, especially because I spent a lot of my childhood, as I talked about earlier, in these places. All right. Okay, we might have to stop if I am going to keep rambling. We'll read until it hits midnight, my time, but which is in about 30 minutes. But after that, we will stop just because um, Estelle said she was tired, and I want Estelle to be able to sleep if she can. But we will continue this, um, and I'll come up with another name. In order to improve them, AC argued that drugs should be given not withdrawn from the user. Substitution products, she hoped, would make treatment into a more attractive and livable proposition for users. In substitution treatment, the user is not required to abstain from drugs. On the contrary, she/he is given a pharmacological equivalent to heroin, methadone, uh, buprenorphine, or a morphine sulfate daily and for a period of years. In contrast to specialists of addiction who had opposed methadone prescription for 20 years on the grounds that, like any drug, it was an obstacle to the construction of human relationships, substitution promoters argue that methadone might benefit the user and play a role in bringing him/her back into the collective. In addition, then, to accusing specialists of failure, substitution promoters developed an original definition of drugs. Under certain conditions, drugs might play a part in the reconstruction of users, not just in their deconstruction. For psychologists, maturation had been an immaterial, symbolic process. For the substitution promoters, construction became chemical, material, and thus literal. The subject was not pre-given, but achieved, and drugs could participate in the construction of the user. This was substitution's alternative proposition of care. I'd agree, but I'd argue most people think mentally ill people can't choose their end goals rather than the reason through how to achieve those ends. Which is interesting because it is just an underlying suspicion of their goals rather than the reasonability necessarily. No, you're totally fine. Wait, am I lagging out? Okay, I'm going to assume you're the one lagging out, and it's not me. I'm going to assume that unless you say so. Okay, yeah, okay, good. Um, possibly. It's kind of hard to tell. Okay, so uh, it's hard to tell. A lot of this is based off experience that I had and that I went through when I was a child, when I was 12 to 18, and so I wasn't an adult when this was taking place. A lot of this was taking place, and I'm only recently an adult. I'm 21. I just turned 21 3 months ago now, um, and I haven't really been in psychiatric hospitals since I've been an adult. Um, and so I'm going to be honest. I think it might actually be a bit of both, though. Still, um, okay. For instance, medication doesn't generally work for me. I don't take meds. I have a hard time. I'm going to try to get back on meds. I'm going to try to talk to a doctor, see if they can think of giving me anything that I haven't already tried. And if it is something I already have tried, even if it gave me horrible side effects, I might consider trying it again just because I'm really worried about myself. Um, and so I might end up dealing with the effects of that for a little bit, and then I might taper myself off of whatever drug it is. Uh, but um, but what's it called? Uh, 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 but I still have been to psychiatric hospitals as an adult, and I was told, people asked me, um, hey, do you take any? One of the first things they ask is, do you take any meds? And my answer is no, I don't take any meds. Well, that's a lie. Now I say estradiol and spironolactone, so big HRT. Um, uh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. I'm getting to it. Sorry. I'm kind of my brain's a bit all over the place, and so I might be a bit all over the place, and I jump around a little bit. So sorry about that. But I'll get to it. Um, but I had a psych. I had one of the things you get asked is, "Are you on any medication?" And my answer is always no. And oftentimes, what nurses will say to me is, "You need to take your medication. You need to take medication." And I explain to them that, well, I actually don't take my medication because it doesn't work. Um, because and because it often gives me terrible side effects that I can't deal with. And when I explain this to them, their response is, well, you need to take your medication. You need to make sure you're taking your medication. It's like, okay. It's like, okay, I don't need to be taking medication. I don't need to be doing that. I'm gonna be so honest. The medications I've been on, I really don't need to be taking. They were like really bad for me. They either did nothing or gave me terrible side effects, and I don't like that gamble. And so yeah, yeah, and so I think there is a sense in which it is a bit of an end goal thing, because end goal thing. When I was a kid, um, kids would often ask, other kids would often ask. It's like one of the things you ask. Hey, when am I going home? And one of the doctors told the patients like, "Oh, hey, why do you uh uh like, oh, sorry, this is like insane what they told this person. They told this child that like 14, they were like 14. They asked like, "Hey, when am I going home?" The doctor basically said something like, "Why? So you can go kill yourself, so you can go try to kill yourself again." And it was like a weird response. And I had similar responses. By the way, uh, doctors are like that sometimes. I just want to say that doctors are like that, and I don't know if they're malicious or what they are, but it's really weird, and I don't get it. Um, I don't understand it. But yeah, ramble over because I'm not going to be able to string together a consistent set of words. Yeah, yeah. The doctors are angels. The first hypothesis substitution promoters then made was that the subject is achieved through habits, techniques, routines, and that drugs can play a part in this achievement. A second hypothesis concerns the role of caretakers in this process of construction of the subject. Not only chemicals, but the caretakers with their theories are constraints which have a role in the construction of a subject. The substitution promoters took the rates of failure of treatment as information about the specialist's own role in the emergence of a phenomenon instead of attributing failure to the inherent difficulty users have in forming human relations. For psychologists, when a patient failed to remain abstinent and relapsed into drug use, this had been taken as a sign of the patient's difficulty to commit to a human relation with the therapist. Was it not well known that users do not care to pass through a human other? By contrast, substitution promoters, along the same lines as recent analysts of scientific practice, agree that their own expectations in instruments participated in producing these appalling results. The scientist and the experimental apparatus, material, and theoretical constraints should be taken as part of the phenomenon. More specifically, the problem, sorry, more specifically, the problem with the specialist apparatus had been not so much that it had had an impact, that these techniques had effectively excluded the very phenomenon in which they were supposed to intervene. By requiring abstinence from their patients, substitution promoters said, specialists had demanded that drug users not be users. They had thus excluded addicts, the very phenomenon of addiction, from addiction treatment. Substitution promoters then sought not to eliminate all influence of techniques upon results, but to define and multiply the constraints under which their intervention might include rather than exclude the phenomenon of addiction. I really like this. This is a really interesting thing. I've gone over this like 4 times now. 4 times now, because I really like it. It's really, whenever I do this, I always have new things to say about it and new things to bounce off of it. I need to use this. This is like a really good jumping off point into other stuff for me. And I need to do that. But I'm trying to set up a Factish Gods reading, and that's taking up like all my fucking time. And I'm also being mentally ill, and I need to. We might be in the hospital again soon. We'll be getting through it. Do I want to continue? No, we will stop for tonight. I don't know if we'll get to a good stopping point in 10 minutes. I highly doubt it. And plus, everyone has comments to make, and I of course want to respond to those comments, and I want to be fair to people. Obviously, but we'll do this again. We'll continue this. We'll finish this. We're about a third of the way done. Part of that was taken up by a long ramble by me. So next time there won't be a long ramble, and so we'll probably get through more. We might even be able to get through all of it, which is about 14 pages, which is doable, but it might be a lot depending on other people have questions and stuff like that. But yeah, you have a wonderful rest of your night as well, everyone, and yeah, you're all awesome. Thank everyone who attended for attending, and thank everyone who commented for commenting in chat. Fantu, your questions and your additions were very good. Estelle, so are you. And yeah. So yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.